Welcome to Herbally Yours, an adventure into the world of natural medicine. Here is your host, Dr. Ellen Kamhi, the natural nurse who will help you take the leap to ultimate wellness.
Greetings, and thank you for joining me, Ellen Kamhi, the natural nurse, for another edition of Herbally Yours, right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC at iHeartRadio, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast place. Today, we are so happy to bring you on board our guest because we always bring you the latest information about the many facets in the world of natural living. And today we are featuring Jerry Kantor. He's a licensed acupuncturist and is a faculty member of the Ontario College of Homeopathic Medicine and owner of Vital Force Healthcare, a Boston area homeopathy and acupuncture practice. He is the first acupuncturist to receive an academic appointment at Harvard Medical School's Department of Anesthesiology. And Jerry is the author of SANE Asylums, which is his new book that we're going to be talking about, that explores the ancient and modern treatment of mental illness. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jerry.
Thank you for having me, Ellen. It's a pleasure.
So I'll share with our listeners and with you as well that I am very familiar with homeopathy, and I have practiced homeopathy in my practice since 1972. So I think it's a phenomenal intervention. I really think everyone should have, and all my clients get, a homeopathic first aid kit. I don't think I would have gotten through parenthood. My kids are close to 50 now, without having simple homeopathic remedies for things, like childhood discomforts, even feeling fearful on the first day of school. All that can be handled so well with homeopathy.
Wow, I'm really impressed that you've been doing it since the 70s. That's amazing. You're really a pioneer.
Well, no, not really, because as you know, homeopathy has been around, for about 200 years. Even older than me.
Yeah, well, the principle goes way, way back to Paracelsus. But yeah, you're right. Samuel Hahnemann brought it to its apotheosis, 200 years ago.
Exactly. So that's what's interesting to me, because I really promote in many of my professional capacities the correct use of the word traditional. And when I'm talking about traditional medicine, what I mean is things that have been around mostly for thousands of years with a great degree of efficacy and safety. So that would be something like botanical medicine, hydrotherapy. Things like that are truly traditional medicine. When we're talking about drug therapy, like modern day pharmaceuticals, which I think can be useful when used correctly, although I believe they're overused and misused, nonetheless, they are not traditional. We can call them modern medicine, conventional medicine, allopathic medicine, lots of words, but not traditional medicine. So when it comes to homeopathy, I almost find that that's in between because, like you said, it goes back. But when we talk about those homeopathic remedies that were developed by Hahnemann, we're talking about, is it around 250 years now?
Yes.
Something like that. So they're much, much older than any conventional drug, but yet they're not as old as what I call traditional medicine, which is herbal medicine. But nonetheless, why do you think, Jerry, with the excellent safety record and the phenomenal efficacy of homeopathy, that it's so maligned here in the United States? Not in England, by the way. The Queen used all homeopathics.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of the topic of this book, the success of homeopathy before psychiatry lost its mind. As you might expect, primarily economic reasons, and the true history has been subverted by the pharmaceutical industry and its lobbyists. So that a distorted history has been created and promulgated. So it's simply not taught. I write in one of my newsletters that I'm embarrassed that as a homeopath, I was compelled to write this history book because it's a very rich history. and a lot to explore. And it's like knowing about the War of 1812 and being the only person who knows about it and trying to tell people. The basic reason is one. I'll boil it down to one thing: homeopathic remedies are not patentable, so there's no profit involved. They belong to the world, just like the acupuncture points. Nobody owns them. But pharmaceutical medicine is all these things are patented, and a lot of money is invested to get them through the FDA. And the pharmaceutical companies absolutely have to recoup that money. So even when they know that something exists in the natural world, like saw palmetto for prostate problems, they will simply not allow the physicians under their control to prescribe it. That's horrible.
And that is getting worse from a political standpoint. Right now, as we speak, there are laws being passed that don't allow physicians to recommend anything other than what is considered standard of practice. And if they do, they can lose their license.
Yeah, I don't know how much more ridiculous it could get. Maybe they could ban people from meditating or ban people from practicing Qigong because these things have to be sold. It's just outrageous. But homeopathy had a fantastic heyday. At least, this book focuses on its use in mental health care. The homeopathic asylums that emerged right after the Civil War, and I focus on 1874 to maybe 1925. And they were magnificent. They were wonderful. They were utopias where homeopathy was practiced in conjunction with many enriching cultural activities. The nurses were absolutely brilliant caregivers and engaged with the clients when their mental illness, trying to help them overcome it in natural ways, involving dialogue and talking to them soothingly, giving them lots of rest, massage. And of course, then the physicians would come around and offer homeopathy. Nobody was kicked out and sent to the community because there was some kind of huge rush. They were genuinely asylums where people could stay until they recovered. And there's a lot of recovery that was necessary because the Civil War traumatized the entire country with its carnage. So many people died, and people the emotional trauma for families was they couldn't recover the bodies of their loved ones. They couldn't listen to last words. They lost their investment in the resurrection of the body. So there's tremendous amount of grief and madness pursuing that. I have a chapter in the book on Mary Todd Lincoln, and that's a story.
Yeah, she was pretty famous in terms of her, having psychiatric issues.
Yeah, so I have a chapter which I think is a journalistic coup 150 years late. And it's the kind of thing that if it was known, might have made a difference, even in the marginalization of homeopathy. Her son maintained that she was crazy, and he was right. She had plenty of reason to lose her mind. She had suffered a severe concussion in falling from a horse-drawn carriage. She lost 2 children. She was a pariah in Washington because her family was from the South and had held slaves. She spent a little bit, and of course, she was trolled also because there was a journalist who made a lot of hay saying that Lincoln never really loved her. He loved someone else before he married her. And then, of course, Lincoln was assassinated right next to her. And her son was concerned about her and wanted to have her put away in an asylum so she could recover. It was a huge trial. 14 doctors testified. She was absolutely deeply disturbed by all accounts. And then history gives us 2 versions about what happened, because 4 months later, she's perfectly fine. One version is, which makes no sense at all, that she wasn't really crazy, and the evidence betrays that altogether. And the other one was, well, all she needed was a little bit of rest and the advice of a couple of lawyers to be okay. What's left out is the most reasonable account, which I have in my book, that she was sent to what I call a SANE asylum in Bellevue, Illinois, treated by a physician who I'm absolutely certain gave her homeopathy, but he kind of kept it to himself. I know this is true because there are lots of conventional hospitals that employed prominent homeopaths at that time.
Wow,
and,
that's a big statement. I got to stop you there, Jerry. I want our listeners to hear what you just said. You said mainstream hospitals regularly used homeopathy.
Yes, that's right. I mean, there were 100 homeopathy hospitals, hundreds of hospitals that were clearly, officially homeopathic. And then there were all these 25% of the mental hospitals were officially homeopathic. And then there's a place like Butler Asylum in Providence, Rhode Island, which did not call itself homeopathic, but it had this fantastic reputation for treating mental illness. And guess what? It had a secret weapon. Samuel Worcester, who was one of the great homeopathic psychiatrists who was on the faculty there. So there was a lot of overlap, and there wasn't that much invested in what you called yourself as a hospital. As a physician, it was important whether you called yourself a homeopath or an allopath. But the hospitals, there was a lot of overlap. Anyway, Richard Patterson, who treated Mary Todd Lincoln, was not officially a homeopath, but he was said to use popular medicines of his time, and he had some special tricks. Mary Todd Lincoln was referred to him by other homeopaths. So it was a lot of wink, wink going on. Patterson did not officially keep records. He was really a very bright guy, and he moved in the higher echelons of mental health care. And as I say, it was very, very likely, I would say 99% likely, that the only way he could have done what he did with her, she was within 3 months. She's sitting on the front stoop talking to his daughter, writing letters, having none of the hallucinations and the violent behaviors that she had before. She had to be detoxed from chloral hydrate. Patterson certainly knew how to do that with homeopathy. There's no question that that's what happened there. So and that story has never been told.
I just want to remind our listeners that you are listening to Herbally Yours on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Ellen Kamhi, the natural nurse. And today, my guest is Jerry Kantor. He is the author of the beautiful book that we're discussing today called SANE Asylums. Very, very rich in the history of how homeopathy was used for mental illness in the past. And I think should still be a major, major intervention, not only for mental illness, but everyone should have both a home kit for homeopathy. And then when you get more deeply involved, some of the remedies do need professional supervision, but still, it's so inexpensive and works so well. And on another political note about the present, Jerry, there's actually additional FDA aggression against homeopathy, even as we speak.
Yeah, that is absolutely amazing. Sometimes I ask folks, okay, what has more official status? A homeopathic remedy, an herb, or a vitamin or a mineral supplement? Nobody gets it. Of all those categories, the only one that is officially a drug is the homeopathic remedy. They are drugs, according to the FDA. They have the identification number and so on.
Yeah,
and that's
OTC,
because,
an over-the-counter drug, yes.
Well, no, even the constitutionally used ones. And the reason, the high-potency remedies. And that's because early on, and especially in 1938, it was formalized, but even before that, the law of similars was recognized as a law of nature. That means that if you can show exactly what a substance does, and that could be a botanical, a chemical compound, the venom of a snake, if you could do under rigorous research conditions, which homeopaths invented, called the proving, what it produces, the effect it produces at the mental, emotional, and physical level in healthy people, then it's absolutely recognized as a law of nature, and the FDA acknowledged this. The dilute version of that becomes a medicine of tremendous power to treat what that substance in a gross amount causes. And that's why the remedies do not have individually, one by one, have to go through randomized controlled trials. That's the reason, because it's well known. It was well known, even though the FDA tries to deny it and tries to back away from it now under the pressure of the pharmaceutical industry. It was just well known that that's the case. You don't have to do, for example, a randomized controlled trial to know that it's beneficial to get back on the horse that threw you. Do you? Would that need a randomized controlled trial? When you're doing that, you're revisiting the scene of the crime, the trauma, you're re-engaging with your demon. You're doing something like homeopathy. You're getting on a pony, maybe a gentler version of the actual horse. But why would you need to prove that over and over and over again? It's not necessary. And that's the basis for homeopathic remedies. And that's why if you do the research and you create that picture, mental emotional picture of what the substance causes in a gross amount, in the junior version, the pony version, the dilute version, that is a homeopathic remedy, and it can be applied to somebody who's sick who comes into your office with that whole picture, that totality of symptoms. That's how we get by.
In your book, SANE Asylums, It's so interesting that you happen to have a chapter. I don't know if you knew this was going to be so appropriate for our day, because you have a whole chapter on homeopathy amid pandemics.
That's
and
right.
You talk about the influenza 1918 pandemic, which was very, very similar in many ways to the one we just went through, and probably more coming along. And you talk about where they did study the fact that people who used homeopathic remedies had a 1.05% mortality during that pandemic, while mainstream medicine was 30% mortality. And I would say I used, again, as a provider, many, many clients who used homeopathy during the time they had COVID and just got better so quickly and with much less suffering.
Yeah, there's so much to talk about in this half hour. Yeah, I practiced, I saw many people sick with COVID or not COVID during this time. I didn't lose anybody. And it didn't matter if they had the diagnosis of COVID or not. The remedy that fit them constitutionally was the one that helped them. I have to say that when people are acutely ill, we have to dance a little faster. We have to change the remedies a little bit more frequently.
Oh, yeah. But, and you can use pharmaceutical
happens.
drugs along with it. That's another beauty, I think, of homeopathy, is that very often people who are already on pharmaceutical drugs cannot use herbs because of herb-drug interactions. And yet they seem to do fine with adding homeopathy, even if you use the homeopathy to more or less ease the symptoms and adverse effects caused by the pharmaceuticals.
That's true. But I'll say this, Ellen, if people want to go all the way and they want to have a serious condition really cured, not just ameliorated, then we usually try to create a detoxification program whereby they gradually come off the pharmaceuticals and become to rely exclusively eventually on the homeopathic. A deep-acting remedy addresses even the serious condition at its root cause, and even autoimmune conditions we can do a great deal with. It's felt like, oh, this is written in stone. This is my genetics, but the genetics have to be expressed in the epigenetic picture, and that is amenable to treatment.
Right, and I will throw in, whenever we're doing natural health activities such as homeopathy, it's usually going to involve changes on the individual's part, such as what you eat, how you address stress, how much you exercise. So it's not just take this pill and everything's fine.
Absolutely. But we'll also find that the reason people have difficulties with certain foods or certain regimes or lack the energy, that can also, to a large extent, be addressed by the remedy. If we know why something's happening at a deep level, the remedy creates a kind of a state of grace and a state of freedom, so that you're more free to exercise your choice and to make better decisions.
Well, I want to remind our listeners that you are listening to Herbally Yours on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Ellen Kamhi, the natural nurse, and my guest today is Mr. Jerry Kantor, Kantor, and we're talking about his book, SANE Asylums. What a beautiful work of history and medicine brought together, Jerry.
Thank you very much. It was really a pleasure and a privilege to write this book. It was just an amazing thing to stumble into. As I say, this should have been properly the purview of professional historians. I can't imagine anybody who would stumble on this and not think it worth writing about. But the opposite is happening at the level of in academia. It's fictitious histories are promulgated, and it's absolutely disgraceful and amazing that it can happen. But that's the power of the pharmaceutical industry's lobby. They will fund a Department of Medicine, and they'll fund its Department of History, and have no qualms about producing books that are simply false. At Johns Hopkins University, for example, I think they're the main culprit. They have persistently been beating this drum that homeopathy was a sect, it was a heresy, it was just something that wasn't really very important, that basically everybody knew it was nonsense. That is nonsense. That's completely untrue. And at the moment, I hope I'm not the sole voice who talks about the history. I'm hoping that other books follow, because there's a lot more to tell about that time than what I wrote about even. And I was just focusing on the mental hospitals.
Which is good because, and that's why I use homeopathy actually not with patients who are, very psychotic, although there is a wonderful psychiatrist, and he's in Glen Cove, Long Island, who does use homeopathy even with severe psychiatric conditions, and he has excellent outcomes. But I think it's such a wonderful thing for people to use just for nervousness, all kinds of things, sleep. It's so much more mild.
You're absolutely right. And there are kits for people who perform, women who perform, who are midwives, for doulas. There are kits for people who just are interested in treating animals. Yeah, pretty much a high percentage of my clients who get involved with this get interested, and they do wind up getting kits. So you're right. People should have that on their own. And then I've had they will sometimes evolve into practitioners themselves, just out of being so fantastically interested and being in demand from their friends. People.
Well, I don't know how you could get through parenthood without a homeopathic kit, because kids are constantly. I just got a call from the school nurse before we started our show today that my grandson slipped because it's rainy out as he got off the school bus, and he's special needs. And he wasn't hurt, but they called me because, if there's a bruise there, they have to let you know. And boy, I would have just given him a homeopathic immediately, and just, there wouldn't be any bruise there, giving him some arnica or something.
The contradictions are absolutely unbelievable. It's really so shameful, the kind of things that are kept from the public. For example, in football, a collision sport with a tremendous pathology rate with head trauma, they should have buckets of arnica on the sideline if you're going to do a sport like that. And moreover, remedies like Natrum sulfurica and Cicuta verosa, which deal with the long-term effects of brain trauma. Conventional medicine has absolutely nothing like that, except, getting you to rest and maybe be in a dark room. And I have tried to present this simple information before mental health groups. They won't let me in. It's absolutely,
well, let's hope this will change. Let's hope this was changed. Last week, I spent 2 full days from 1 to 5 on an online meeting by the NIH called Whole Person Medicine. And they were talking about how to implement natural therapeutics to become standard of care, because they said the evidence is so clear that in many cases it is much more effective with a much lower incidence of adverse effects and also much more cost effective. So they did not discuss homeopathy, however.
Well, that's heartening to hear, Ellen. So maybe there is a turning point. Things do eventually change. But
it seems like it should already, really. But we see it going. We do see that as more people learn about this, like someone today listens to our show, gets the book SANE Asylums, The Success of Homeopathy Before Psychiatry Lost Its Mind. What a great kind of double entendre there in the name of the book, SANE Asylums, and gets interested in homeopathy, starts to use it for themselves. That's how the change happens. But then the FDA comes in and says, you're not allowed to label these homeopathic remedies in a way that allows people to know how to use them because they don't want them used.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? It's absolutely amazing. What a time to live in. It's just astonishing. Yeah, we have to take control over our own health, and this is an absolute right.
What's the best way for people to find you, and your book?
Well, SANE Asylums is available on Amazon. It's at the Simon & Schuster site. If you Google it and my name, you'll see a number of places to find it. My own publishing website is rightwhalepress.com, and my other books can be found there as well. But this one is put out by Inner Traditions, which is an absolutely wonderful publisher. I cannot say enough good things about them. And I had a fantastic editor. And if you just Google the book, SANE Asylums, Jerry Kantor, you'll see plenty of places to obtain it.
And there's so much interesting things, like if people are into the sports world, you have chapters about people like Selden Talcott, right? Because he was introducing baseball into psychiatric care.
Yes, he's the book is dedicated to him. I call him the greatest psychiatrist this country has ever not known. He was the superintendent of the Middletown Hospital for the Insane in Middletown, New York, which was kind of the mother church of these fantastic homeopathic mental hospitals. So many doctors came through there and became superintendents at other hospitals or opened their own asylums. Yeah, he was just an absolutely brilliant man and a Civil War physician, and rose up and ran this place, knew everything about it, how to situate it, how to run every aspect of it. And he noticed that people were that inmates were fascinated by watching baseball. They were much better when they were able to get involved with baseball. And he created a team there. This is a fantastic story in itself, called the Asylums. He poached players from neighboring teams, and he created a powerhouse team that did not include the inmates, did include a future Hall of Famer, Jack Chesbrough. And they beat everybody, and they played major league teams to a standoff. They were hugely popular. And I find it just so funny that they're called the Asylums. Up 120 miles away in Utica, there was another asylum, which is supposedly a moral care facility like Middletown. And that was run by a man by the name of Amariah Brigham. And yeah, they offered some farming and cultural activities, and you could write for the asylum newspaper. But there, if you had a violent episode, or if you were out of control, Amariah Brigham did something really unbelievably horrible. He put you in a what was called the Utica crib, kind of a torture device that Edward Allan Poe would have made up. It was just basically a narrow coffin of slats. You couldn't move at all. And he tried to break your spirit with that and punish you. That was another moral care asylum, apparently.
So there have always been, really interesting and not always wonderful psychiatric care procedures, which are even going on today. But we're going to tell our listeners and thank them for listening to us today. And also, again, the name of your book to learn more about mental care and homeopathy, and of course, the fabulous history that is involved in this book. So thank you for being our guest today.
You're welcome, Ellen. What a pleasure.
Thank you, listeners, for tuning into Herbally Yours, produced in the studios of 90.3 WHPC, Nassau Community College, Garden City, New York. For further information, you can email us at whpc@ncc.edu. This is your host, Ellen Kamhi at naturalnurse.com, inviting you to join us again next week for another edition of Herbally Yours. Until then, stay healthy.